Hi guys, I'm Kasha. Welcome to the channel and welcome as always to our coffee times to discuss horror books. And today I'm here to let you know everything that I managed to read in the month of October.
It's coffee time.
I did start the month of October really optimistic, even though I had a huge TBR pile. And honestly, I only managed to read 6 books, which I know it's not a lot, but let me say that I did read a Stephen King book, so I feel like that counts. Because that book was like 600 pages long, so I am really happy that I managed to get that one in the month of October. Anyways, we're here to discuss the books that I did read, what I thought of them. I'm always doing these reviews spoiler free. If you're new here, we like to rate our books with coffee mugs, and we always start with the lowest rating to the highest, so we always end up on a positive note. First, let's talk about House of Horrors by Nigel Cawthorne, and this one, it is a non-fiction book about a real true crime story. I believe a lot of people know about this guy, Fritzl. He is an Austrian guy that basically kidnapped one of his daughters on his basement, kept her there and abused of her, and even had, I think a total it was of 7 children with her. And it was all over the news when they were able to find them. So what I cannot even say, you know, that I like this book or that I found it interesting, because when it comes to these kind of true stories, it's always really hard to say you enjoy the book because it's horrifying. So what I can tell you is that I did appreciate that the author did not go into details when it comes to describe the things that happened in the basement. It's not kind of glorifying the acts and not going into details into all the gruesome parts. So I really did appreciate that it didn't focus on that. Now, this book did come out like really soon after the news broke, so it means that it doesn't have a lot of information about what happened years later, about the trial. It's mostly about the investigation that happened firsthand, that happened right after the news broke of what was happening in that basement, in that house. And I would say you will like this book if you are interested in true crime, if you have never heard of the story and just want to know a little bit about it, but also if you are a little bit familiar and just want to dive a little bit deeper into exactly how he managed to do the things he was doing, like how he was able to hide that he had his daughter kidnapped, the lies that he was telling around, how allegedly nobody else knew about it, his wife didn't know about it, all of these things. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper into that, the book does touch those topics. And then sadly, we have to talk about Ghost Eaters by Clay McLeod Chapman. And I say sadly because I didn't give this book much of a higher rating, honestly, because it has been, for me, my least favorite one by the author so far. And I had such high expectations about this book because I felt like it was gonna dive a little bit deeper into the paranormal, the supernatural elements, and I felt like it was gonna be such a great ghost story. And you know, of course, the cover, I'm not gonna lie, was something that really attracted me to the book as well. But unfortunately, from the 3 novels he has out there, this has been my least favorite. I feel like part of it is because the book doesn't really start catching up with the whole seance and ghost story until like 40% into the book. And the first half of the book is more about ghost stories, about more a little bit of the paranormal. But to be honest, the main focus of the book seems to be addiction and grief and more of those things. Especially the second part of the book does focus a lot more on addiction. I was excited about the premise of this book because it promised kind of like a modern take on ghost, and we have this drug that is basically allowing you to connect with the realm of the dead. It's kind of like a drug that connects you to ghosts, things like that. And I was excited about that concept. That's how it was kind of sold to me, and I loved it. And honestly, as I was reading the book, I started to get a little bit bored with it, especially towards the middle, and I didn't know if I wanted to finish it or not, which is weird because the other 2 books by him I absolutely love from cover to cover. I think I was just underwhelmed by the actual plot of the book, and I also could not relate to any of the main characters and their relationships, and that made it hard for me to be invested because, you know, the focus is on the characters and I just could not relate. I could not care less about them, and that's always a big issue for me with books. If I cannot relate at all to the characters, if I don't even find like I really like them or whatever, then it's really hard for me to be invested. But still, you guys, if you wanted to pick it up, please do. This is just my subjective opinion. I was just disappointed because it's not exactly what I was expecting. But if you're looking for a book that does deal a lot with grief and addiction, and it does introduce this modern concept of ghosts through drugs, then, you know, give this one a chance. Moving on to middle grade, we have The Hunting by Lindsay Duga, and I know the author has written some YA books, but I have never read them. This has been my first book by her, and it's also her first middle grade horror book, and I really appreciated this book because even though we do have kind of like a classic haunted story, I did see some things that were a little bit fresh and a little bit new, and I also appreciated that our main character is an orphan that has been waiting to be adopted and also has this beautiful relationship with a stray dog. And you don't always see main characters that come from backgrounds like this, like they live in an orphanage and then they get adopted. Most or the majority of middle grade books have kids with families that are somehow, you know, stable and loving families. That's what you see the most. If you get to see the parents at all, sometimes you don't even get to know the parents much at all. So I really appreciated that because I'm pretty sure there's going to be kids out there that read books, spooky books, that come from an orphanage and they were old enough to know that they were adopted, and they might, you know, see themselves a little bit in a book, even if it's a spooky book. So anyways, this is at its core a story of a hunting and a beautiful mansion. So when our kid gets adopted, she goes to live with this family that lives in this beautiful mansion, and they also take the dog, and strange things start to happen in the house, strange sounds, strange things that our main character sees, and she starts to question her own sanity. That's how I describe it to you. But I feel like if you're looking for a true hunting story, this might be one for you because it's a little bit different. And also, if you want to get introduced to horror books, this is also perfect because it's just spooky, but it's not like bloody, it's not too much, and it has the perfect amount of creepiness. Next we have The Whisper Man by Alex North. I finally got to this book. It was in my previous TBRs a couple of times and I never got to it, so I'm happy that I finally finished it. And the story follows a man that kind of rekindles a relationship with his father as they both try to catch a killer that is kidnapping and murdering kids in our town, the town of Featherbank. So our main character has just moved there and he's a little bit unaware of the history of the place and that kids were kidnapped and stuff, but since he has a son of his own, he starts to get a little bit concerned about the situation. So I really enjoyed this book because it is kind of like a police investigation, but it also brings a lot of horror elements to it. There's a lot of gruesome scenes, so I feel like this is a thriller perfect for people that love horror. I do think that the main focus of the book was put a lot on the family dynamics and the relationship between our main character and his father, and maybe they could have put a lot more of that energy into the mystery and, you know, catching the killer. But all in all, I really enjoyed it and I definitely want to pick up something else by the author. A good thriller is not easy to find, and I thought that this book, you know, had my interest from the beginning and I felt invested, and especially when I was halfway through, that's when I was extremely excited to figure out what happened next, who was gonna be the killer, how they were gonna catch him, if they catch him, and I started to get really invested. So I feel like if it starts slow for you as well, just keep going. And I feel this book is gonna be perfect for people, like I said, that want to read a thriller but also want a little bit of horror in it. Now let's move to Fairy Tale by Stephen King. So I have been reading Stephen King for a long time. My first horror book as for many people, was a Stephen King book. It was Pet Sematary, and I'm always excited to read the new King book and see where he's gonna take me next. Now, this story was so different from everything I have read by Stephen King, and I feel like that's what I really enjoyed it, and also because it has been a long time since I've read fantasy, so this one was great as a palate cleanser from all the thrillers and horrors. So we follow Charlie. He's 17 and his life has not been easy so far. He lost his mom, and then his dad started to drink too much because of it, and so it's, you know, fair to say that he has been struggling for the last years, and he now kind of wants to give something good to the world, something good deed or something he can do. So one day his prayers are answered, and while he's biking home he hears a dog barking, and it causes his attention, and he realizes that there is an old man on the floor and he's laying there because he just had an accident and needs help. So Charlie helps this guy and calls an ambulance, and they kind of start a relationship, and I really like this relationship between Charlie and the old guy. And as the synopsis of the book implies, we are going to see Charlie discover that there is a door into another world. So this all kind of happens throughout the first like maybe 200 pages, like early on. And after that, we start to discover this fantasy world together with Charlie. And I feel like the fact that we learn about the world and everything that's in it together with Charlie, it does help to understand the whole new world. Like, you know how sometimes in fantasy it's hard to follow up with all of the terminology and all of the things and all of the different characters. With this one, it's really easy to follow. I also feel like it's because Stephen King has been writing for so long that he knows how to transport you into his own universe, into his own new created world, and he does that flawlessly. Now, this new world is not just all fun, it's also really dark. So this is a dark fantasy, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was a lot of fun. It does have some gruesome moments, some really dark twists, so I feel like it's perfect for people that are looking for a dark fantasy. But keep in mind, this is a 600 pages chunker, so it might be a little bit of your time that might be required to go through this book. It does get a little bit dragging slightly throughout the middle, but we all know that Stephen King could edit down his books. He chooses not to, and you know, I have no issue with it, but for some people it might be a little bit too much. And last but definitely not least, we have The Other Ones by Fran Hart, and I picked this one up because it was said to be kind of Heartstopper meets spooky season, and that is exactly what it is. Now, let me warn you though, it is not exactly a horror book, so I just wanted to put it out there in case people are hoping that this is horror. It does have a little bit of, you know, spooky Halloween fall vibes, but that's about it. So just trying to lower your expectations in case that you thought this was horror. But we follow Sal. He lives in a haunted house, and his life is going to change when somebody new comes into his life, someone called Pax. And Pax was one of my favorite characters because he was unapologetically himself all the time, and he knew who he was, and he embraced it. And I love to see that in a teenager character in a book, because it is quite refreshing to see somebody knowing who they are and just embracing it no matter what anybody says at such an early age. And I think it's so important to show that it is perfectly fine also to know who you are early on, as well as just needing more time to figure it out. So what I can tell you without spoiling anything of what the book is really about is that there is a lot about friendship and family, grief, but also all is surrounded in this kind of like spooky season with pumpkins and Halloween parties. So it does have kind of that spooky fall vibe, but like I said, do not expect this book to be horror. But I definitely really loved it. It was exactly what my heart needed. It was kind of like if we would have gotten a Heartstopper special for Halloween kind of thing. So that's why I really enjoyed it. It's like a really cozy read, and I would like to read more things by the author. Alright you guys, so this is everything that I read in October. I know it's only 6 books, but honestly it was a pretty good reading month for me, considering that I read the Stephen King book, which was 600 pages long. So I'm quite happy with the things that I read in October. Let me know down below what has been your best read from October. What is that spooky read that just hit the right spot for the spooky season? Let's talk about it in the comments down below. Thank you guys as always so much for watching, and I hope to see you all as always in our next coffee time. Bye.